The morning air in Savannah carried the scent of magnolia blossoms and fresh-baked pecan pie from Martha's kitchen window, but the sweetness couldn't mask the bitter taste that had settled in my mouth since receiving that certified letter 3 weeks ago. My arthritic fingers trembled as I set down my coffee cup, the porcelain clinking against the saucer with a sound that seemed to echo through the empty parlor of my Victorian home. At 78 years old, I thought I had seen every shade of human betrayal, every twist that family could throw at an old woman's heart. I was wrong. The letter sat there on my mahogany dining table, its legal jargon swimming before my tired eyes like black ants on white paper. Estate proceedings. Contest of will. Undue influence. Words that sliced through my chest like winter wind through threadbare curtains. My grandson Joshua, my sweet boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, was challenging my decision to leave my family's ancestral home and fortune to someone else. The audacity of it made my chest tighten with a pain sharper than my angina medication could touch. The house creaked around me, 13 rooms of memories and secrets that had sheltered 4 generations of Blackwood women. The afternoon light filtered through lace curtains, casting dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed births, deaths, marriages, and now, apparently, the kind of family destruction that makes neighbors whisper behind their garden gates. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 o'clock, its deep bronze tone vibrating through the hardwood floors beneath my slippered feet. I closed my eyes and let myself remember when Joshua was 7 years old, his small hand sticky with honey from my kitchen biscuits, his laugh bubbling up from his belly like champagne fizz. He would run through these very rooms, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floors, chasing our old tabby cat Duchess while the smell of my famous Sunday pot roast filled the air with its rich, savory promise. Those were the days when his parents, my son Robert and his wife Patricia, would visit every weekend, bringing fresh flowers and wine and stories from their busy lives in Atlanta. But children grow up, and sometimes they grow into strangers wearing familiar faces. The sound of gravel crunching under tires drew my attention to the front window. A black sedan pulled into my circular driveway, its engine purring like a well-fed cat. The driver's door opened, and Joshua stepped out, his expensive suit as dark as the storm clouds gathering overhead. At 25, he had inherited the Blackwood height and the sharp cheekbones that had made his great-grandmother a beauty queen in 1932. But his eyes, those green eyes that once sparkled with childhood mischief, now held the cold calculation I had come to associate with his new lifestyle. The doorbell's melodic chime echoed through the house, followed by 3 sharp knocks that made me wince. Joshua had never knocked before. He used to burst through that front door like sunshine breaking through morning fog, calling out, "Grandma Evelyn, I'm home," in a voice that could chase away any sadness clinging to my weary shoulders. Now he stood there like a stranger seeking an audience with royalty. I made my way to the front door, my cane tapping against the marble foyer with each slow step. The brass doorknob felt cold under my palm as I turned it, and the afternoon heat rushed in like an unwelcome guest, bringing with it the smell of freshly cut grass and Joshua's expensive cologne. "Hello, grandmother," he said, his voice formal and distant as a courtroom proceeding. He didn't lean down to kiss my cheek or ask about my health or comment on how the roses were blooming this year. Instead, he stood there in his designer clothes, briefcase in hand, looking like the corporate lawyer he had become. "Joshua," I replied, stepping back to let him enter. "I suppose you're here about the will." His footsteps echoed differently now as he walked through the foyer, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble like an executioner's countdown. The sound made my skin prickle with unease. This was the same boy who used to slide down the banister in his sock feet, giggling as I pretended to scold him for scuffing the antique wood. "We need to talk," he said, setting his briefcase down on the entry table with more force than necessary. The brass lamp there rattled, its crystals chiming together like broken wind chimes. "This whole situation is insane, grandmother. You can't seriously intend to leave everything to her." Horror. He couldn't even say her name anymore, as if speaking it would burn his tongue. Carmen Rodriguez had been part of our family for 12 years, arriving when Joshua was 13 and needing someone to help manage his chaos while his parents worked their demanding jobs in the city. She had come to us through an agency, a quiet woman in her 30s with calloused hands and tired eyes, carrying a single suitcase and speaking English with the musical accent of her Dominican homeland. "Carmen has been more family to me than anyone in years," I said, leading Joshua into the parlor where afternoon sunlight painted golden rectangles on the Persian rug. The room smelled of lemon oil and lavender sachets, scents that had perfumed this space since my own grandmother's time. She's earned every penny I'm leaving her. Joshua's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his smooth-shaven cheek. He sat down in my late husband's favorite armchair, the leather creaking under his weight like a tired sigh. His fingers drummed against the armrest, tapping out a rhythm that spoke of impatience and barely controlled anger. "Earned it how?" he demanded, his voice rising enough to disturb the mourning doves nesting outside the window. "By manipulating a lonely old woman? By poisoning your mind against your own family?" The words hit me like physical blows, each syllable sharp as broken glass. I lowered myself into my own chair, the velvet cushion soft against my aching bones, and tried to steady my breathing. The afternoon heat made the air thick and hard to swallow, like breathing through wet cotton. "Watch your tongue, young man," I said, my voice carrying the authority that had once made him straighten his spine and apologize for tracking mud through the house. "Carmen has done nothing but care for this family with more devotion than I ever received from blood relatives." Joshua leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the little boy who used to confess his schoolyard troubles in this same position. But when he spoke, his words shattered that illusion completely. "She's a gold digger, grandmother. A manipulative woman who saw an opportunity and took it. Do you really think she cares about you, or is it the $2 million inheritance and this house that keeps her so devoted?" $2 million. He said it like it was small change, like the fortune my husband had built through decades of careful investments and smart business decisions meant nothing more than pocket money. The number hung in the air between us, heavy as the humidity that made my cotton dress stick to my skin. "Money," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's all any of you think about anymore." The grandfather clock chimed the half hour, its sound cutting through the tension like a judge's gavel. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising the kind of summer storm that would send rain dancing across the wraparound porch and fill the air with the sweet smell of wet earth. "It's not just about money," Joshua said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It's about family. About legacy. This house has been in our family for 4 generations, grandmother. Great-great-grandmother Isabel built this place with her own vision and her husband's railroad money. Are you really going to let it go to a stranger?" "Carmen isn't a stranger," I said, my voice growing stronger as memories flooded back. "She was here when you forgot my birthday 3 years running. She held my hand through pneumonia last winter when you were too busy closing deals to return my calls. She reads to me every evening, makes my favorite banana bread every Sunday, and knows exactly how I like my tea brewed. What part of that sounds like manipulation to you?" Joshua stood abruptly, pacing to the window where he stared out at the gathering storm clouds. His reflection in the glass looked distorted, unfamiliar, like a stranger wearing my grandson's face. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters and sending the Spanish moss swaying like ghostly fingers against the darkening sky. "She's changed you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The grandmother I knew would never turn her back on family like this." The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth wrapped in its poison. I had changed, but not in the way Joshua imagined. I had grown tired of being taken for granted, weary of being seen as nothing more than a source of future inheritance. Carmen had shown me what genuine care looked like, and the contrast with my family's indifference had become impossible to ignore. "Maybe I have changed," I admitted, watching as the first raindrops began streaking down the window glass. "Maybe I've finally learned the difference between loving someone and being loved in return." Joshua spun around, his eyes blazing with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Hurt? Anger? Fear? Perhaps all three, mixed together in a cocktail that made him look younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. "Is that what you think?" he asked. "That I don't love you?" The question hung in the air like the smell of ozone before a lightning strike. I studied his face, searching for the little boy who used to curl up in my lap while I read him fairy tales, who would pick dandelions from the yard and present them to me like precious roses. When had that child disappeared? When had love become something measured by visits and phone calls rather than felt in the heart? "I think you love the idea of me," I said carefully. "The grandmother who bakes cookies and keeps family traditions alive and leaves behind houses and money when she dies." "But when did you last love me, Joshua?"
The real me, with my aches and fears and need for companionship?
The storm broke overhead as if summoned by our conversation, rain drumming against the windows and roof with increasing intensity. The parlor grew darker as clouds blocked the sun, and I reached over to turn on the Tiffany lamp that had belonged to my mother. Its stained glass shade cast rainbow patterns on the walls, warm colors that did nothing to chase away the chill settling in my bones. Joshua returned to his chair, his expensive suit rumpled now, his perfect hair mussed by his nervous hands. He looked lost, like a child who had wandered too far from home and couldn't find his way back.
"I've been busy," he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Building a career, starting my life." "I thought you understood that." "I understood that you had priorities," I replied.
I just didn't realize I had fallen so far down the list. The rain grew heavier, turning the world outside into a watercolor painting where edges blurred and colors ran together. The sound was almost soothing, a natural symphony that had lulled me to sleep countless times over the decades I had lived in this house. But today it felt ominous, like tears the sky was shedding for all the broken connections between grandmothers and grandsons. "Tell me about this lawsuit," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" Joshua opened his briefcase with sharp, efficient movements, pulling out a stack of legal documents that rustled like autumn leaves. The papers were thick and formal, covered in the kind of language that turned human relationships into contracts and love into legal terminology. "We're contesting the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity," he said, his voice taking on the professional tone he probably used in boardrooms. "Carmen Rodriguez has isolated you from your family, manipulated your emotions, and taken advantage of your advanced age to secure an inheritance she has no legal or moral right to claim." Each word felt like a small violence, a paper cut that drew just enough blood to sting. Diminished capacity. As if my age had somehow erased my ability to recognize genuine affection when I received it. Undue influence. As if kindness and consistency were weapons used against me rather than gifts freely given. "And what evidence do you have of this manipulation?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Joshua shuffled through the papers, pulling out what looked like photographs and bank statements. The sight of them made my stomach clench with a nausea that had nothing to do with my usual digestive troubles. "Bank records showing significant cash gifts to Carmen over the past 3 years," he said, spreading the documents across my coffee table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. $1,500 here, $2,000 there, always around the same time you seem to be pulling away from family gatherings. "Those were Christmas bonuses and emergency loans," I said, my voice rising in defense. "Carmen's mother needed surgery, and her daughter was applying to college. I helped because that's what people do when they care about each other." "Or because she manipulated you into caring," Joshua countered. "Look at these photos." He placed several printed pictures on the table, and my breath caught in my throat. They showed Carmen and me at the farmer's market, laughing over a conversation I couldn't quite remember. Another showed us sitting on the front porch swing, my head resting on her shoulder as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of peach and gold. A third captured us at my birthday dinner last year, Carmen's arms around my shoulders as she helped me blow out the candles on a cake she had made from scratch. "These were taken by a private investigator," Joshua said, his voice matter-of-fact as if hiring someone to spy on his own grandmother was as normal as checking the weather. "Notice how she's always touching you, always positioned as the caring daughter figure. It's textbook emotional manipulation." I stared at the photographs, seeing not manipulation but genuine moments of affection and connection. Carmen's smile in each picture was real, reaching her eyes and crinkling the corners in the way that only happens when joy is authentic. My own face showed a contentment I hadn't felt in years before she came into my life. "You hired someone to follow me?" I asked, the violation feeling almost as sharp as the betrayal itself. "I hired someone to protect your interests," Joshua corrected. "Someone had to document what was happening here." The rain continued its assault on the house, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like bowling balls in heaven's attic. The sound made the windows rattle in their frames, a percussion that matched the chaos building in my chest. "Where is Carmen now?" I asked, realizing I hadn't heard her humming in the kitchen or moving about upstairs as she usually did at this time of day. Joshua glanced at his watch, a gold piece that probably cost more than Carmen made in 6 months. She should be at the courthouse, he said. Depositions started at 3 o'clock. My lawyers are questioning her about her relationship with you and her knowledge of your estate planning. The words hit me like ice water thrown against warm skin. Carmen, sitting in some sterile legal office, answering questions from hostile lawyers who saw her as nothing more than an opportunistic stranger. I imagined her careful English becoming even more careful under pressure, her dark eyes wide with confusion and hurt as men in expensive suits dissected our friendship like it was evidence of a crime. You ambushed her, I whispered. We served her with a subpoena, Joshua replied. It's standard procedure in these cases. Standard procedure. As if our lives were nothing more than a case number in some law firm's filing system. As if the woman who had held my hand through panic attacks and celebrated my small victories was just another witness to be examined and discredited. I stood up so quickly that my cane clattered to the floor, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the quiet room. Joshua started forward as if to help me, but I waved him away with a fury that surprised us both. Get out, I said, my voice carrying all the authority of someone who had been mistress of this house for 53 years. Get out of my home right now. Grandmother, please. I said get out. The words tore from my throat with such force that they left me dizzy. Take your photographs and your lawyers and your private investigators and get out of my house. And don't come back unless you're prepared to apologize to Carmen and drop this ridiculous lawsuit. Joshua gathered his papers with movements that had lost their earlier confidence. His hands shook slightly as he stuffed everything back into his briefcase, and for a moment I saw fear flicker across his features. Not fear of me, but fear of losing something he had taken for granted until it was threatened. I'm trying to protect you, he said, his voice smaller now, more like the boy I remembered. No, I replied, retrieving my cane from where it had fallen. You're trying to protect an inheritance you've never earned and don't deserve. There's a difference. He stood in my foyer for a long moment, rain drumming against the door behind him like impatient fingers. The afternoon light had turned gray-green, the color of old pond water, and it cast strange shadows across his face that made him look like a stranger. I love you, grandmother, he said finally, the words sounding like a prayer offered too late. Then prove it, I replied. Drop the lawsuit and make peace with Carmen. She's not your enemy, Joshua. She's the best thing that's happened to this family in years. He left without another word, the front door closing behind him with a finality that made the house feel instantly smaller. I stood in the foyer listening to his car pull out of the driveway, its engine noise gradually fading until only the storm remained, washing the world clean with its relentless rain. The courthouse smelled of old wood polish, stale coffee, and something else I couldn't identify but that reminded me of fear. I had never been inside the Chatham County Superior Court building before, despite living in Savannah for over 5 decades, and the marble floors echoed my footsteps like whispered warnings as I made my way through the corridors. My arthritis protested every step, but determination drove me forward through the maze of legal offices and conference rooms where justice was supposedly served on a daily basis. Finding Carmen took longer than I expected. The receptionist at Whitman and Associates, Joshua's law firm, looked at me with the kind of polite confusion usually reserved for lost tourists asking for directions to restaurants that closed 30 years ago. She was young, probably not much older than Joshua, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never reached her skeptical blue eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said, her voice carrying the precise diction of someone who had been trained to deal with difficult clients. The deposition is in progress, and I'm not authorized to interrupt legal proceedings. That woman in there is my friend, I said, leaning heavily on my cane as exhaustion from the drive and the emotional weight of the day began to catch up with me. She's being questioned about things she doesn't understand by people who have no interest in the truth. I need to see her. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, revealing a glimpse of genuine human concern beneath her professional facade. She glanced toward a closed door at the end of the hallway, where muffled voices suggested serious conversation was taking place. Are you Mrs. Blackwood? She asked, lowering her voice as if speaking a secret. I am. I'll see what I can do, she said, picking up her phone and pressing a series of buttons with perfectly manicured nails painted the color of fresh blood. I waited on a leather bench that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, listening to the whispered phone conversation and trying to calm the trembling in my hands that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with fury. Through the tall windows, I could see the storm had passed, leaving behind a late afternoon sky that glowed like honey spread on warm bread. The city beyond looked washed clean, the kind of fresh beauty that follows every major storm and makes you remember why you fell in love with a place in the first place.
Mrs. Blackwood?
A tall man in a navy suit emerged from the conference room, extending his hand with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients.
I'm Bradley Whitman, senior partner. I understand you'd like to see Ms. Rodriguez?
I would, I said, not bothering to shake his hand or engage in the polite pleasantries that usually greased the wheels of social interaction.
Is she all right?
Mr. Whitman's expression shifted slightly, like clouds passing over the sun.
She's struggling with the questions, to be honest.
Her English is adequate, but legal terminology can be challenging for non-native speakers. The condescension in his tone made my teeth clench. Carmen spoke 3 languages fluently and had been managing my complex schedule and household needs for 12 years, but this man saw only an accent and assumed incompetence. She's been answering questions for over 2 hours, he continued.
We're nearly finished, but if you'd like to wait. I'd like to see her now, I interrupted. This is still America, isn't it?
She has a right to have someone there who cares about her well-being. The lawyer glanced back toward the conference room, clearly weighing his options. Through the partially open door, I could hear Carmen's voice, careful and precise as always, saying something about cleaning schedules and grocery shopping. The mundane details of our shared life being dissected by strangers who saw only dollar signs and legal precedents. Very well, Mr. Whitman said finally. But please understand that this is highly irregular.
You'll need to remain quiet and not interfere with the proceedings.
He led me down a hallway lined with law books and framed diplomas, past offices where other lawyers worked late into the evening, billing hours and building cases on the foundation of human conflict. The conference room door was heavy oak with frosted glass panels, and when he opened it, I stepped into a space that felt more like an interrogation chamber than a place where truth was meant to emerge. Carmen sat at the far end of a polished table that could have seated 12 comfortably, looking small and vulnerable in a simple black dress I recognized as her best church outfit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands were folded in her lap with the careful composure she maintained when she was nervous. Across from her sat 2 more lawyers, both men in their 40s with the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from winning cases by intimidating witnesses rather than uncovering facts. When Carmen saw me, her face lit up with relief so pure it made my chest ache with protective fury. She started to rise, but one of the lawyers gestured for her to remain seated. Mrs. Rodriguez, the younger lawyer said, consulting a yellow legal pad covered with notes.
Let's return to the financial gifts Mrs. Blackwood has given you over the past 3 years. Can you tell us exactly how you convinced an elderly woman to give you over $20,000 in cash payments?
I never convinced her to give me nothing, Carmen replied, her accent growing slightly thicker under stress as it always did when she was upset or excited. Mrs. Evelyn, she is generous lady.
When my mama needs surgery, she offered to help.
When my daughter Maria need money for college application fees, she insists to pay.
Insist?
The older lawyer pounced on the word like a cat spotting movement in tall grass.
So you did ask for money?
No. Carmen's voice rose slightly, and I could see the flush of frustration coloring her olive-toned cheeks. I tell Mrs. Evelyn about my worries, because we are friends.
Friends share troubles, see?
She offer help because her heart is good. But you accepted the money, the younger lawyer pressed. Thousands of dollars from an elderly woman whose grandson alleges you've been systematically manipulating.
I couldn't remain silent any longer.
The word manipulation felt like fingernails on a chalkboard, and watching these men pick apart Carmen's dignity was more than I could bear. Enough, I said, my voice carrying the authority I had learned from decades of managing board meetings and charity committees.
This interrogation stops now.
All 3 lawyers turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from surprise to annoyed. Carmen's eyes filled with tears of relief, and she pressed one hand to her heart as if trying to calm its racing rhythm. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Whitman said carefully, we discussed the need for you to remain quiet during these proceedings. And I've decided I'm finished being quiet, I replied, moving slowly around the table to stand beside Carmen's chair. The click of my cane against the hardwood floor sounded like a metronome counting down to Judgment Day. Carmen, dear, you don't have to answer any more of their questions. This deposition is over. The younger lawyer started to object, but I raised my hand with the same gesture I had once used to silence unruly church committees and arguing grandchildren. I am the subject of this will, I continued. The person whose mental capacity and decision-making ability you're questioning. And I'm here to tell you that my mind is perfectly clear, my judgment is sound, and my decision to leave my estate to Carmen Rodriguez is based on 12 years of kindness, devotion, and genuine affection. None of which you would understand, apparently. Carmen reached up and squeezed my hand with fingers that trembled slightly from emotion and exhaustion. Her skin was warm and soft, bearing the calluses that came from years of honest work, from caring for others without counting the cost. Mrs. Blackwood, the older lawyer said, leaning forward with the predatory focus of someone who smelled weakness, are you aware that Ms. Rodriguez has been systematically isolating you from your family? That she's discouraged you from maintaining relationships with blood relatives who love you? The accusation was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Isolating me? I repeated. Carmen is the one who insisted I call Joshua every Sunday for 3 years running, even when he was too busy to talk for more than 5 minutes. She's the one who suggested we invite Robert and Patricia for Easter dinner last spring, and when they canceled at the last minute for a golf tournament, she spent the entire day trying to cheer me up. But you've grown distant from your family since her arrival, the younger lawyer insisted, consulting his notes again. Your grandson testified that you've missed family gatherings, ignored invitations to holidays. Because I finally realized those invitations were obligations, not expressions of love, I interrupted. Because I got tired of being treated like a duty to be discharged rather than a person to be cherished. Carmen showed me the difference between someone who sees you as a future inheritance and someone who values you as a human being. The room fell silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic moving through the evening streets of Savannah. Through the conference room windows, I could see the first stars appearing in a sky that had cleared to deep purple velvet, and the sight reminded me of countless evenings spent on my front porch with Carmen, talking about everything and nothing while the night settled around us like a comfortable blanket. Carmen, I said, turning to face her fully. Tell them about last Thursday evening. She looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned in her dark eyes. You mean when you have the chest pains? Yes, I said, my voice softer now as I remembered the fear that had gripped me when the sharp pain shot through my left arm and made breathing feel like swallowing broken glass. Tell them what happened. Carmen straightened in her chair, addressing the lawyers with dignity that no amount of legal intimidation could diminish. Mrs. Evelyn, she called for me around 9 o'clock at night. She is on the bathroom floor, very scared, having trouble to breathe. I call 911 immediately, then I sit with her and hold her hand until the paramedics come. At the hospital, I stay all night in the emergency room. When they say it's just anxiety attack, not heart problem, I take her home and make her favorite tea and sit with her until she fall asleep. And where was your grandson during this medical emergency, Mrs. Blackwood? I asked, knowing the answer would sting but needing it spoken aloud. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before I provided the answer myself. Joshua was at a work conference in Chicago. I called him after we got home from the hospital, and he said he was glad I was feeling better and that he'd try to visit soon. Carmen took 3 days off from her other job to make sure I was all right, sleeping in the guest room in case I needed help during the night. The younger lawyer made a note on his pad, but his earlier aggressive confidence had deflated like a punctured balloon. The older lawyer cleared his throat and shuffled his papers, clearly searching for a new line of attack that would restore momentum to their case. Mrs. Rodriguez, he said finally, isn't it true that you've actively discouraged Mrs. Blackwood from considering other estate planning options? That you've suggested she avoid discussing her will with family members? Carmen looked genuinely puzzled by the question. I never talk with Mrs. Evelyn about her will, she said. Is not my business what she do with her money. She tell me one day that she changed some papers with the lawyer, but I say, Mrs. Evelyn, this is family business, not for me to hear. But you must have known she was leaving you a substantial inheritance, the lawyer pressed. No, Carmen replied simply.
She never tell me nothing about inheritance. I work for her because I love her, like family. The money she pay me is good, but I never expect nothing more." The truth in her voice was so evident that even the lawyers seemed to recognize it. Carmen had never been motivated by money or inheritance prospects. She had simply done what came naturally to her, caring for someone who needed care, offering friendship to someone who was lonely, treating an elderly woman with the respect and affection that should have come from blood relatives but didn't. "Mrs. Blackwood," Mr. Whitman said, turning to me with what I assumed was supposed to be grandfatherly concern, "surely you can understand your family's confusion and hurt about this decision. This house has been in your family for generations. Don't you think it should stay in the family?" "It will be staying with family," I replied. "Carmen Rodriguez has been more family to me than my own blood relations for over a decade. She'll take care of this house the way it deserves to be cared for, and she'll use the inheritance to secure a future for herself and her daughter. That seems like a much better legacy than leaving everything to someone who sees it only in terms of dollar signs and investment potential." The lawyers exchanged glances that spoke of strategies reconsidered and arguments crumbling. Outside, the streetlights had come on, casting golden pools of illumination on sidewalks still damp from the afternoon storm. The workday was ending for most people, families gathering around dinner tables and children being called in from playing in puddles left behind by the rain. "I think we have enough for today," Mr. Whitman said finally, closing his leather portfolio with a snap that sounded like a judge's gavel ending a session. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for your time. We may need to speak with you again as the case proceeds." Carmen nodded politely, but I could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders and the slightly dazed look in her eyes that comes from being treated like a criminal when you know you've done nothing wrong. "There won't be a case," I said, standing slowly and allowing Carmen to support my elbow as I balanced myself with the cane. "Joshua has exactly 1 week to drop this lawsuit and apologize to Carmen. If he doesn't, I'll be contacting my own lawyer about adding a codicil to my will that specifically explains why my family has forfeited any claim to my estate through their behavior during these proceedings." The threat landed like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples of concern across the lawyers' faces. They knew that a detailed explanation of family dysfunction attached to a legal document would be much harder to challenge than a simple bequest to a loyal employee. Carmen and I left the law office together, walking slowly through the marble corridors and out into the warm evening air that tasted of rain and jasmine and the promise of better days ahead. The storm had washed the city clean, leaving behind the kind of crystalline clarity that makes everything look sharper and more vivid than usual. "Mrs. Evelyn," Carmen said as we reached my car, "you should not have come. This business, it is not good for your health." "My health is fine," I replied, fishing in my purse for car keys that seemed to be hiding from me with malicious intent. "It's my family that's sick, and you're the only medicine that's worked in years." She helped me into the driver's seat with the practiced ease of someone who had been assisting me with various tasks for over a decade, adjusting the seat and checking that my seatbelt was properly fastened. Her movements were gentle and efficient, carrying the automatic care that comes from genuine affection rather than duty or obligation. "What happened now?" she asked, settling into the passenger seat with a soft sigh that spoke of relief and weariness in equal measure. "Now we go home," I said, starting the engine and pulling out of the parking garage into streets that glowed with the soft light of early evening. "And we wait to see if Joshua has learned anything from today, or if he's determined to destroy what's left of our relationship over money he's never earned and doesn't need." The drive back to the house took us through the historic district, past mansions that had witnessed their own family dramas and secrets over the centuries. Spanish moss hung like lace curtains from ancient oak trees, and the air was thick with the perfume of night-blooming jasmine and the salt-tinged breeze that drifted in from the coast. This was the savannah I had fallen in love with as a young bride, the city where I had raised my son and buried my husband and built a life that was supposed to culminate in surrounded by loving family. Instead, I was driving home with the one person who truly cared about my well-being, while my blood relatives hired lawyers to prove she was my enemy. The house looked welcoming as we turned into the driveway, its windows glowing with the warm yellow light of table lamps and overhead fixtures that had illuminated family dinners and Christmas mornings and quiet evenings spent reading or working on needlepoint. The wraparound porch beckoned with wicker furniture and hanging plants that Carmen tended with the same devotion she showed to everything else in her care. "I make you dinner," Carmen said as we walked up the front steps together, my cane tapping against the wooden planks with each slow step. "Something light, maybe soup and sandwiches?" That sounds perfect, I replied, though food was the last thing on my mind. The confrontation at the law office had drained me more than I wanted to admit, and all I really wanted was to sit in my favorite chair with a cup of chamomile tea and try to make sense of how my family had become such strangers to me. The house welcomed us back with familiar scents and sounds, the grandfather clock chiming 7 o'clock, the soft hum of the air conditioning system, the lingering aroma of the vanilla candles Carmen liked to burn in the kitchen while she worked. These were the sensory details that made a house feel like home, the small comforts that accumulate over years of shared living and create an atmosphere of peace and belonging. Carmen bustled about the kitchen with the quiet efficiency I had come to associate with her presence, opening cabinets and checking the refrigerator while humming softly under her breath. The melody was something from her childhood in the Dominican Republic, a song her mother had sung while cooking dinner for 8 children in a house that was probably smaller than my kitchen. I settled into the breakfast nook that overlooked the back garden, where my roses were recovering from the afternoon storm and beginning to perfume the evening air with their sweet fragrance. Through the window, I could see fireflies beginning their nightly dance among the jasmine vines, tiny sparks of magic that never failed to make me feel like the world still held wonder for those willing to notice it. "Mrs. Evelyn," Carmen said, setting a bowl of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich in front of me, "I need to tell you something important." The serious tone in her voice made me look up from the meal that smelled like comfort and childhood memories. Carmen rarely spoke with such gravity, preferring to deliver even difficult news with the kind of gentle optimism that made problems seem manageable rather than overwhelming. "What is it, dear?" She sat down across from me with her own bowl of soup, but made no move to eat. Instead, she folded her hands on the table and looked directly into my eyes with an intensity that made my chest tighten with anticipation. "Today, at the lawyer's office," she began, "they asked me many questions about you, about our friendship, about why you are good to me and my family. And I realized something I never tell you before." I waited, my spoon halfway to my mouth, while Carmen gathered her thoughts and chose her words with care. 12 years ago, when I first come to work for you, I was not just looking for a job," she said. "I was running away from something very bad." The soup grew cold in my bowl as Carmen's words settled between us like autumn leaves drifting to earth, each one carrying weight I hadn't expected. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, more intimate, as if the walls had drawn closer to protect the secret she was about to share. Outside, the evening sounds of Savannah continued their familiar symphony, crickets chirping, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the distant hum of traffic on Bull Street, but inside our breakfast nook, the world had narrowed to just the two of us and the truth that had been waiting 12 years to emerge. "What were you running from?" I asked, setting down my spoon with hands that trembled slightly from more than age. Carmen's dark eyes filled with a pain so deep it seemed to come from her bones, and she looked out the window toward the garden where shadows were lengthening as twilight settled over the city like a soft blanket. When she spoke, her voice carried the careful cadence of someone who had practiced these words in her mind countless times but never found the courage to speak them aloud. "My husband," she said simply, and those 2 words contained volumes of suffering. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine, feeling the slight tremor that ran through her fingers like an electric current of remembered fear. Carmen had never mentioned a husband in all our years together, and I had assumed she was divorced or widowed, perhaps preferring not to discuss painful memories with her elderly employer. "He was not a good man," she continued, her accent thickening as emotion clouded her careful English. "For 8 years, he drink too much, he lose jobs, he—" She paused, touching her left cheek in a gesture so unconscious I almost missed it. "He hurt me when he get angry, which was very often." The words hit me like physical blows, each revelation striking against my heart with the force of waves against seawall stone. I thought of all the times Carmen had flinched slightly when unexpected noises startled her, how she always positioned herself near doorways as if planning escape routes, the way she sometimes touched her ribs when she thought no one was watching. "Carmen," I whispered, "I had no idea." "I never want you to know," she replied, tears beginning to trace silver paths down her cheeks. "When I come to work for your family, I tell myself I start new life. I be strong woman who take care of nice old lady and her grandson, and I never think about the past no more." Through the window, I watched a mockingbird settle on the garden fence, its song cutting through the evening air like liquid music. The normalcy of the moment felt strange juxtaposed against the weight of Carmen's revelation, as if the world should have paused to acknowledge the significance of secrets finally spoken. "How did you escape?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer.
Carmen wiped her eyes with the paper napkin from beside her soup bowl, leaving small white specks clinging to her dark lashes.
My daughter Maria, she was 7 years old then. One night, he come home very drunk, more angry than usual because he lose another job. He start hitting me, but this time Maria try to stop him. She get between us, this little girl with her arms spread wide, telling her papa to please stop hurting mama. My chest tightened with a pain that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with the image of a child trying to protect her mother from violence no one should ever have to endure. He pushed her, Carmen continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She fall and hit her head on the coffee table corner. There was so much blood, and she was so still, and I think he killed my baby. The kitchen had grown darker as we talked, evening shadows creeping across the floor like spilled ink, but neither of us moved to turn on additional lights. The dimness felt appropriate somehow, as if bright illumination would be too harsh for the darkness Carmen was finally releasing into the world. But she was all right? I asked, remembering the bright, intelligent young woman who had visited us over the years, who had grown from a shy teenager into a college-bound honor student with her mother's gentle eyes and determined spirit. She have concussion, needs stitches, but she was okay, Carmen said, relief still evident in her voice even after all these years. But seeing her there, unconscious and bleeding because she tried to protect me, I know I cannot stay no more. I take Maria to the hospital, and when the doctor asks what happened, I tell him we have accident. But I think he know the truth. What did you do? I call my sister Rosa, who live here in Georgia already for 5 years. She say come immediately, bring nothing, just come. So when Maria get released from hospital, I tell my husband we go to visit Rosa for few days, let Maria rest and recover. But we never come back. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times in the front hallway, its bronze tone floating through the house like a benediction. The sound reminded me of all the evenings Carmen and I had spent together in this kitchen, sharing meals and conversation, building the kind of friendship I had thought was based on simple compatibility and mutual affection. Now I understood it was something deeper, a bond forged in her need for safety and my need for genuine connection. Rosa, she worked for the agency that find housekeepers and nannies for rich families, Carmen continued. She say she know elderly lady in Savannah who need help with her grandson and her big house. She say maybe this lady be kind, maybe give me chance to start over. And you came to interview with me, I said, remembering that first meeting 13 years ago. Carmen had seemed nervous but determined, wearing a simple navy dress and carrying references from previous employers in the Dominican Republic. She had answered my questions about cooking and cleaning and child supervision with careful attention, but what struck me most was the way she looked at everything, the house, the furniture, even me, as if she couldn't quite believe such beauty and peace could exist in the same world as the violence she had fled. I was so scared you would not hire me, she admitted. My English was not so good then, and I have no experience with teenage boys or rich American families. But you smile at me, and you show me your garden, and you ask about Maria and if she likes school. You treat me like person, not just worker. You were exactly what we needed, I said, and it was true. Joshua had been going through his rebellious phase, testing boundaries and pushing against every rule Robert and Patricia established. Carmen had arrived like an angel of patience and wisdom, somehow knowing exactly how to give a 13-year-old boy the structure he needed without making him feel controlled or diminished. But I never tell you the real reason I need this job so much, Carmen said. I never tell you that every day for first 2 years, I wake up afraid he might find us. I never tell you that sometimes, when you or Joshua make sudden noise or speak too loud, my heart races like crazy and I have to remember I am safe now. The revelations kept coming like waves, each one reshaping my understanding of the woman who had shared my life for over a decade. All those times I had appreciated her gentle manner and calming presence, I had been witnessing not just natural personality traits but the carefully constructed defenses of someone who had survived unthinkable trauma. Where is he now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Dead, Carmen said with no emotion whatsoever. Rosa told me 3 years ago. He drank himself to death, alone in the apartment where we used to live. No funeral, no family who want to claim his body. Just, finished. The finality in her voice spoke of a chapter closed but not forgotten, a threat neutralized but scars that would always remain.
I thought of all the small kindnesses I had shown Carmen over the years, the Christmas bonuses, the emergency loans, the invitations to family gatherings, and realized they had meant more to her than I could have imagined. To someone who had lived with fear and violence, simple human decency must have felt like miraculous gifts.
"Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer.
Carmen straightened in her chair, wiping the last traces of tears from her cheeks with a dignity that spoke of strength forged in fire. "Because today, those lawyers, they try to make me sound like criminal. They say I manipulate you, that I take advantage of lonely old woman for money.
And I realized they do not understand what really happened between us."
She stood and moved to the kitchen counter, where she began clearing away the dishes we had barely touched, her movements precise and efficient even as emotions continued to war across her features. "When I come to your house 12 years ago, I was broken woman with broken child, running from man who want to destroy us," she continued. "You give us safe place, steady work, kindness when we expect nothing. You become family when we have no family.
You save our lives, Mrs. Evelyn. Not the other way around."
The words hung in the air between us like bridge cables, strong and true and connecting what had been two separate shores of understanding. I felt tears prick my own eyes as the full weight of our relationship settled into new context. I had thought I was being generous to a deserving employee, but Carmen saw it as salvation freely offered to someone who desperately needed rescue. "You never took advantage of anything," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You gave me purpose when I felt useless, companionship when I was lonely, and the kind of loyalty that my own family couldn't be bothered to provide." Carmen returned to the table and knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in hers with a gentleness that spoke of years of caring touch, adjusting pillows, steadying steps, offering comfort through simple human connection. "Mrs. Evelyn," she said, "I need you to know something else. Tomorrow, when we go to court, your grandson's lawyer's going to try one more time to prove I am bad woman who trick you. They going to ask questions about my past, about why I never talk about my husband, about why I seem to have no history before I come to work for you." My chest tightened with protective anger at the thought of those cold-eyed men using Carmen's trauma against her, turning survival into evidence of deception.
"They can ask whatever they want," I said firmly. "It won't change anything."
"Maybe it will change everything," Carmen replied.
"Because I decide I am going to tell them truth. All of it.
About my husband, about running away, about why your kindness means so much to me. And when I do that, when I tell them about the life you save, maybe they understand why you want to leave me inheritance." The bravery in her voice took my breath away. I knew how much it had cost her to tell me these secrets, and the thought of her sharing them with hostile strangers in a courtroom felt like watching someone walk voluntarily into fire to prove they weren't afraid to burn.
"Carmen, you don't have to do that," I said. "Your past is private. They have no right to that information."
"Maybe not legal right," she agreed, "but if it helped them understand that I never manipulate you, that you are not crazy old woman making bad decision, then it is worth it." She stood and moved to the kitchen window, where the last traces of daylight were fading into deep purple twilight. Fireflies had begun their evening dance among the jasmine vines, tiny sparks of magic that never failed to lift my spirits even in the darkest moments. "There is one more thing," she said without turning around.
"Something I never tell nobody, not even Rosa."
I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs with anticipation and dread in equal measure. "The night we leave, when Maria was in hospital getting stitches, I go back to apartment one last time to get few things, pictures, birth certificates, her favorite stuffed animal. I think he is passed out drunk and will not wake up." She paused, her reflection visible in the dark window glass like a ghost overlaying the garden scene beyond.
"But he was awake. Waiting for us. And when he see me packing bag, he know we not coming back." The silence stretched between us like a tightrope, fragile and dangerous and requiring perfect balance to cross safely.
"He tried to stop me," Carmen continued, her voice barely audible now. "He grabbed my arm, twisted behind my back, say if I try to leave he will kill me and Maria both. He have knife from kitchen, and his eyes was like animal, not human no more." I found myself holding my breath, as if making any sound might shatter her courage to continue. "I tell him okay, I will not leave, please just let me go to Maria in hospital. And when he let go my arm to put down the knife, I pick up lamp from table and hit him. The words fell into the quiet kitchen like stones dropped into still water, each one creating ripples that spread outward and changed everything they touched.
I hit him hard enough to knock him unconscious, she said, finally turning to face me. Hard enough that blood come from his head and make puddle on floor. For few minutes, I think maybe I kill him. And you know what I feel?
I shook my head, though I suspected the answer would break my heart. Nothing, she said. No guilt, no fear, no sadness.
Just relief that finally he cannot hurt us no more.
Carmen returned to her chair and looked directly into my eyes with an honesty that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. So when your grandson's lawyers ask me tomorrow if I am good person who deserve inheritance, I going to tell them truth. I am woman who run away in night with injured child. I am woman who maybe would have killed violent man if God had not stopped my hand. I am woman who lie for 12 years about who I really am. She reached across the table and took my hands in hers once more. But I am also woman who love you like mother, who take care of you like daughter, who would do anything to protect you from people who want to hurt you for money.
And maybe that is enough.
The kitchen had grown completely dark now, illuminated only by the soft glow of the light above the stove and the silver gleam of moonlight streaming through the windows. The house around us settled into its nighttime rhythms, the whisper of air through registers, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of clocks marking time's passage with mechanical precision.
Carmen, I said finally, you are the bravest person I have ever known.
And tomorrow, when you tell those lawyers who you really are, they're going to understand exactly why I chose you as my family. The Chatham County Courthouse felt different the next morning, as if the building itself had absorbed the weight of the testimony that was about to be given. Carmen and I arrived early, before the summer heat could build to its usual oppressive intensity, and found ourselves walking through halls that echoed with the whispered conversations of lawyers preparing their cases and families gathering to watch justice attempt to find its way through the labyrinth of human conflict. Joshua was already there when we entered the courtroom, sitting at the plaintiff's table with his team of attorneys like a general surrounded by his officers. He looked polished and confident in his expensive navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, his posture erect with the kind of self-assurance that comes from growing up with money and privilege. When he saw me walk in with Carmen, his jaw tightened slightly, but he made no move to acknowledge us. The courtroom smelled of old wood and leather-bound law books, with undertones of coffee and nervous perspiration that seemed to permeate every surface. High windows let in streams of morning sunlight that cut through the air like golden swords, illuminating dust motes that danced and swirled like tiny witnesses to the drama about to unfold. Carmen had chosen to wear the same simple black dress from the deposition, but she had added a string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, a small act of armor that spoke of dignity maintained in the face of adversity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her hands were steady as she took her seat at the defendant's table, though I could see the rapid pulse beating in the hollow of her throat. Judge Margaret Henley entered with the measured pace of someone who had presided over countless family disputes and understood that behind every legal proceeding lay broken hearts and shattered relationships that no court ruling could truly heal. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing, and her reputation for fairness was legendary throughout the Savannah legal community. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of the will of Mrs. Evelyn Blackwood," Judge Henley announced, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom's acoustic architecture. "The plaintiff, Joshua Blackwood, is contesting the bequest of the family estate to Carmen Rodriguez on grounds of undue influence and the testator's diminished capacity." The formal language felt strange when applied to our personal relationships, turning love and betrayal into legal terminology that drained the emotion from what was essentially a story about family and belonging and the different ways people show they care. Joshua's lead attorney, the aggressive younger lawyer from the deposition, stood to present their case with the confidence of someone who believed he had assembled an airtight argument. His opening statement painted Carmen as a calculating opportunist who had systematically manipulated a lonely elderly woman, isolating her from her blood family and positioning herself to inherit a fortune she had no legal or moral right to claim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the small jury that would decide our fate, "this case is about predatory behavior targeting a vulnerable senior citizen. The defendant, Carmen Rodriguez, used her position of trust and the plaintiff's grandmother's loneliness to systematically extract money and gifts while undermining the family relationships that should have been Mrs. Blackwood's primary source of support in her golden years. I listened to him describe my relationship with Carmen as if it were a criminal enterprise rather than the most genuine friendship I had experienced in decades. Every kindness I had shown her was reframed as evidence of manipulation, every moment of connection transformed into proof of her calculating nature. When it came time for Carmen to testify, she walked to the witness stand with the careful dignity of someone who had made peace with truth-telling regardless of the consequences. The court reporter's fingers moved across her stenotype machine like a pianist playing a complex sonata, capturing every word for the permanent record that would outlive all of us.
Ms. Rodriguez, Joshua's attorney began, you've worked for Mrs. Blackwood for 12 years, correct?
Yes, sir.
And during that time, she has given you numerous cash gifts totaling over $20,000, is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the court why an elderly woman would give such substantial sums to her employee?
Carmen looked directly at the jury as she answered, her voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. Because she saved my life and my daughter's life, Carmen said. And because when someone show you kindness when you expect only cruelty, you remember that kindness forever. The attorney's prepared questions seemed to evaporate as Carmen's answer hung in the air like morning mist over a river, beautiful and mysterious and impossible to capture or contain. I'm not sure I understand, the attorney said, clearly thrown off his plan script. 12 years ago, I come to Mrs. Evelyn's house because I was running away, Carmen said, looking now at Joshua with a directness that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. I was running away from husband who beat me and my daughter, who nearly killed my little girl because she tried to protect me from his fists. The courtroom fell completely silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning system and the distant sound of traffic moving through downtown Savannah. Even the court reporter's fingers had stilled on her machine, as if the weight of Carmen's words had temporarily frozen time itself. For 8 years, I live in house where every day I wonder if this will be the day he finally kill us, Carmen continued, her voice growing stronger as she released secrets that had been locked away for over a decade. My daughter Maria, she learned to hide in closet when Papa come home drinking. She learned to be very quiet, very small, because loud children make him angry. I watched Joshua's face as Carmen spoke, seeing confusion and discomfort replace his earlier confidence. This was not the story his lawyers had prepared him to hear, not the narrative of manipulation and greed they had built their case upon. The night we escaped, he hit Maria so hard she fall and crack her head open on coffee table, Carmen said, her hands gripping the arms of the witness chair until her knuckles went white. 7 years old, and there is blood everywhere, and she is unconscious, and I think my baby is dead because she tried to protect her mama. Several jury members leaned forward in their seats, drawn into the story despite themselves. The bailiff stood a little straighter, his hand moving unconsciously toward his weapon as if the violence Carmen described might somehow materialize in his courtroom. I take Maria to hospital, tell doctor we have accident. But I know I cannot go back to that house no more. I cannot watch my daughter grow up afraid, cannot teach her that love's supposed to hurt and men supposed to be dangerous. Carmen's voice broke slightly on the last words, and she paused to collect herself before continuing. My sister Rosa, she live here in Georgia, she say come immediately. Bring nothing, just come and start new life. So when Maria get released from hospital, I tell my husband we go visit family for few days. But we never come back. And you came to work for Mrs. Blackwood, the attorney said, clearly struggling to find a way to use this testimony to support his client's case. Rosa work for agency that find jobs for women like me, Carmen explained. Women who need work, who need safety, who need chance to start over. She say she know elderly lady who need help with house and teenage grandson. She say maybe this lady be kind. Carmen turned to look at me then, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears and a love so pure it made my chest ache with protective fury. When I meet Mrs. Evelyn first time, I am so scared, she said. My English not so good, I have no references from American families, I never work in house so big and beautiful. But she smile at me, and she ask about Maria, and she show me her roses like I am guest, not just worker looking for job. The attorney tried to interrupt, but Judge Henley held up her hand for silence. Let her finish, the judge said, and something in her tone suggested she understood the significance of what she was hearing. Mrs. Evelyn give me job when I have nothing, Carmen continued. She give me safe place to live, steady money to send back to Rosa for Maria's care. She treat me like person, not like servant. And when Joshua, she looked directly at my grandson, when Joshua go through difficult time like all teenagers do, she never blame me or say I not doing good job. She say, Carmen, we help each other through this. Joshua's face had gone pale, and I could see him remembering those turbulent years when he had pushed against every boundary and tested every relationship. Carmen had been the steady presence who made his rebellious phase manageable rather than destructive, who had somehow known exactly how to give him structure without making him feel controlled. Over the years, Mrs. Evelyn become like mother to me, Carmen said, her voice steady again as she found her rhythm. When Maria gets sick, Mrs. Evelyn pay for doctor. When my own mama needs surgery in Dominican Republic, Mrs. Evelyn send money without me even asking. When Maria wanna go to college but we have no savings, Mrs. Evelyn help with application fees and say Maria can come live with us during school breaks. The attorney made another attempt to redirect the testimony. Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you've systematically isolated Mrs. Blackwood from her family during this period? Carmen's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger if she were a different kind of person. Instead, her response carried the patient weariness of someone who had learned to endure accusation and injustice with grace. I never isolate her from nobody, she said firmly. I am one who remind her to call Joshua every Sunday when he stopped calling on his own. I am one who suggest we invite family for holidays when they stop coming to visit. I am one who cooks special meals and clean extra rooms hoping someone will come spend time with her. She paused, looking around the courtroom at the faces of people who were beginning to understand that this case was not what they had been led to believe. You want to know about isolation? Carmen asked, addressing the attorney directly. Isolation is when women have chest pains at 9 o'clock at night and only person who come to help is the woman you call manipulator. Isolation is when woman go to emergency room scared she having heart attack, and only person who sit with her all night is person you say take advantage of her loneliness. The attorney was clearly floundering now, his prepared questions useless against the raw honesty of Carmen's testimony. He shuffled through his notes, looking for some angle that would restore his narrative of greed and manipulation. But you must have known about Mrs. Blackwood's intention to change her will, he pressed. You must have encouraged this decision. I never know nothing about any will until Joshua come to house 3 weeks ago very angry, Carmen replied. Mrs. Evelyn, she tell me she visit lawyer to change some papers, but she say is family business, not for me to hear. I say, Mrs. Evelyn, your money and your family, not my business to know. She looked directly at Joshua again, and when she spoke, her voice carried a sadness that seemed to fill the entire courtroom. I think maybe she changed will because she tired of being taken for granted, Carmen said. Because she tired of people who only visit when they need something, who only call to ask if she okay but not because they want to know if she happy. The silence that followed was so complete it felt alive, breathing with the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. Joshua stared at his hands, unable to meet Carmen's gaze or mine, and I realized he was finally beginning to understand what his lawyer's accusations had cost, not just money or inheritance, but the last chance to repair a relationship he had carelessly allowed to deteriorate. Judge Henley leaned forward slightly in her chair, her intelligent eyes fixed on Carmen with the intensity of someone who recognized authenticity when she heard it. Ms. Rodriguez, the judge said, is there anything else you'd like to tell the court about your relationship with Mrs. Blackwood? Carmen was quiet for a long moment, considering her words with the care of someone who understood their weight. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the accumulated wisdom of survival and resilience and love freely given without expectation of return. Your Honor, she said, I know what it looked like from outside. Poor woman from Dominican Republic, working for rich old lady, inheriting money and house worth millions of dollars. I know it seemed like I must be criminal or manipulator or something bad. She paused, looking around the courtroom at faces that were waiting to judge not just her legal status but her moral worth as a human being. But I want you to understand something. 12 years ago, I was broken woman with broken child, running away from man who want to destroy us. I have nothing except hope that somewhere, somehow, we could find safe place to heal and grow and maybe be happy. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, carrying the authority of someone who had walked through fire and emerged with wisdom forged in flame. Mrs. Evelyn give us that safe place. She give us family when we have no family. She give us love when we forget what love's supposed to feel like. She save our lives, not the other way around. Carmen turned to look at me then, and the smile that crossed her features was like sunrise after the longest night, warm and golden and full of promise. If Mrs. Evelyn want to leave me inheritance, is not because I manipulate her or take advantage of lonely old woman. Is because for 12 years, I love her like daughter love mother, and she love me like mother love daughter.
And maybe that is what family really supposed to be.
The courtroom remained silent for several heartbeats after Carmen finished speaking, as if everyone present needed time to absorb the full impact of her testimony. The morning sunlight had shifted during the proceedings, and now it fell across the witness stand like a benediction, illuminating Carmen's face with a golden glow that made her look almost ethereal. Judge Henley cleared her throat and turned to Joshua's attorney.
Does the plaintiff have any further questions for this witness?
The lawyer looked at his notes, then at his client, then back at Carmen with the expression of someone who had realized his case had evaporated like morning dew under the harsh light of truth.
No further questions, Your Honor. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Henley said, addressing Joshua directly, would you like to testify on your own behalf?
Joshua looked up from his hands for the first time since Carmen had begun her testimony, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years, genuine shame mixed with the kind of recognition that comes when you finally understand the magnitude of your mistakes. No, Your Honor, he said, his voice barely audible. I would like to withdraw the contest. The words fell into the quiet courtroom like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread outward and changed everything they touched. Joshua's lawyers looked stunned, clearly unprepared for their client's sudden capitulation, but Joshua himself seemed lighter somehow, as if the weight he had been carrying had finally been lifted from his shoulders.
Are you certain about this decision, Mr. Blackwood? Judge Henley asked. Once the contest is withdrawn, it cannot be refiled.
I'm certain, Joshua replied, standing slowly and walking toward the witness stand where Carmen still sat.
I owe Ms. Rodriguez an apology. I owe my grandmother an apology. I was wrong about everything.
He stopped a few feet from Carmen, close enough that she could see the tears threatening to spill from his green eyes, the eyes that had once sparkled with childhood innocence and were now reflecting the pain of hard-won wisdom. Carmen, he said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the lawyers, for the accusations, for treating you like an enemy when you've been nothing but good to our family. I'm sorry for being so blind to what you mean to grandmother, and what she means to you. Carmen looked at him for a long moment, this young man who had grown from the sweet child she had helped raise into someone she no longer recognized, and then she smiled with the kind of forgiveness that comes only from hearts that have known real suffering and chosen love over bitterness. Joshua, she said, standing and reaching out to touch his arm with maternal gentleness, you are a good boy who just forget for little while what is important.
Family is not about money or houses or inheritance.
Family is about people who take care of each other, who show up when life gets difficult, who love each other even when love is not convenient. She paused, looking past him to where I sat at the defendant's table, my heart so full of pride and gratitude I thought it might burst from the pressure. Your grandmother, she never stopped loving you, Carmen continued. She never stopped hoping you would remember what you learned when you were a small boy playing in her garden. Maybe now you remember, and we all be family again like we supposed to be. Joshua nodded, tears flowing freely down his cheeks now, and when he spoke, his voice carried the echo of the child I had once known, the boy who had believed in fairy tales and happy endings and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. Can we try? He asked, looking between Carmen and me with hope so fragile it seemed like it might shatter if handled roughly.
Can we try to be family again?
I stood slowly, my arthritis protesting the sudden movement but my heart soaring with joy that made physical discomfort seem irrelevant. Walking over to where Joshua and Carmen stood together, I reached out and pulled them both into an embrace that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. We already are family, I whispered, breathing in the scent of Carmen's familiar perfume and the expensive cologne Joshua wore that couldn't quite mask the underlying smell of vulnerability and hope.
We always have been.
We just forgot for a while. Judge Henley watched our reunion with the kind of smile that suggested she had seen enough family destruction to recognize healing when it occurred in her courtroom. When she spoke, her voice carried the warmth of someone who understood that the best legal outcomes were those that mended rather than severed human connections. Case dismissed, she said, bringing her gavel down with a sound that seemed to echo not just through the courtroom but through all the broken places in our hearts, sealing them with the permanent adhesive of forgiveness and renewed love.